Hi, I'm Klinger, marketer for Hive International. Welcome to this special episode post-event. We just had an amazing event this weekend called Hive Creators in partnership with Southern Adventist University and many other Adventist business entrepreneurs. And now we're at the OCI studio. We're so thankful for OCI. And if you have a business or a ministry and are not a member of OCI, let me tell you, you're missing out. And here we are with a very special person and with a very special project. And the world needs to know about this, Nicole Parker. Thank you, Nicole, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, Klinger.
Yes. So at this weekend, we had a highlight. One of the highlights of the events was the people presenting their projects and their businesses to the investors. And they did this kind of a Shark Tank kind of thing. Everybody really liked it. And then on Sunday, the end of the program of the event, the investors were there meeting with people with their ideas, with their projects. So I walk in the hall and I find you talking to Michelle Ducamus. And then you tell me a little bit about what you're doing. And I just wanted to hear more about it. And when you start talking to me about this project, I was just amazed. And I said, we have to do something about this. Because I've asked you, so what kind of marketing you're doing? You said, I'm not.
Yeah, it's true.
and a lot of people are buying. They have lots of good reviews. Not only, everywhere, Amazon. And I said, you're not doing anything? So that's, it's amazing. So I really wanted to get together with you so we can have this opportunity to talk about them so people can know. Because I was blessed just by hearing them and what you're doing with them. And I know they will be too.
Well, thank you so much. The truth is I've been working on writing this series of books for about 9 years now. But I only finished writing the final one in December of 2022. And then I started teaching classes again. This semester is my semester teaching at Southern. And so I haven't had any time to do anything, but I've been kind of holding back on marketing because I wanted to have the whole set. But every time I finished a book, I published it, and all of them have become #1 bestsellers on Amazon. So every time I publish one, within a few days, sometimes within a few hours, it becomes the #1 new release in children's Christian historical fiction.
Amazing. And let's step back a little bit and say, who is Nicole Parker? Tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing, and people want to know you.
Well, thank you. I was raised as a Christian, but I went through some abuse as a small child, and it really impacted on my ability to love and connect with God. I just could not understand why a God of love would allow suffering. And so I had this tremendous barrier in my devotional time and my desire to connect with God because I just couldn't trust him. And then when I was an adult, it was at 16, I decided to give my heart to Jesus, despite all of the confusion, because I started seeing who he was. And I just fell in love with Jesus and thought, if that's who he is, I think I could trust him with my life. Wow. So at that point, I didn't have any counselors. I didn't have anybody to help me work through all the trauma from the abuse. So it was largely prayer, Bible study, hammering out who Jesus really was and how that would impact on everything else in my life. And that process was so hard that I very nearly lost my hold on Christ so many times. Wow. And yet, he was so patient with me. So it was really the character of God as a God of love that made me cling to him and say, I will not let you go. This has to be who you are. It doesn't make any sense for the universe to run on anything else but love, because that's the only thing that makes us come alive. Wow. So there must be somebody at the universe's center who is love. And if they are, it has to be a relational being. You can't have a force that is love. It has to be a relational being. So I came back to that over and over. And that became the theme of why I wrote these books, to help people not to have to go through that tremendous struggle to believe that God is who he says he is.
And I know a lot of people will connect with this. I did. Not long ago, I met a family who was so broken. And it's hard for me even to mention what they've been through. And I right away, when I talked to you, I remember by reference, somebody mentioned about a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's about trauma. It's a large book. It's like psychiatrist. And I was going through the book, and I just realized that statistics is just like stunning. It's like huge. I couldn't even believe myself that in a country, just talking about the U.S., a country like this could have so many cases of abuse. And you're familiar with those statistics, right? You even shared some of those.
Yes, I do a lot of abuse work. And even just in the sexual abuse, we know that statistically, by the time a girl reaches the age of 18, 1 out of 3 chance she's already been sexually abused or assaulted. And then, of course, there are so many more that happen in college. Right. For boys, it's more like 1 out of 5 or 6, according to Predators by Anna Salter. And that's just sexual abuse. Trauma is truly the mission field of the 22nd, 21st century. However long we're here, trauma is escalating, and we have to expect that as the love of many grows cold.
Wow.
Because abuse is the natural result of us misunderstanding how to use power. When we use power in self-exalting ways, we cannot help developing into the spirit of Satan. And abuse is all about power.
Wow, that's just stunning. But now tell me some of the consequences that people can face if they don't deal with this, if they don't work it out, if they've been abused and they grow and they don't work that out. What are some consequences of that in their lifetime?
Oh, there's so many physical consequences that we've tracked, just like you said, and the body keeps the score. You know, the levels of ulcers, just gastrointestinal problems overall, anxiety, because if I can't believe that God is going to use his power to deliver me, I am going to clamp down and trying to have power to deliver myself. My hands will grip the steering wheel of my life tighter. And I cannot stop that. I have to know somebody else is steering.
They have a trust issue big time, right?
Right. So anxiety is the natural result of not believing that God is going to use his power to deliver at the right time in the right way. And similarly, if I can't believe in God's love, I will feel like I am not valuable. My life is meaningless. So we have to know that God is a God of love, and that he will always use his power in safe ways, that he will always only ever use power in godly and self-sacrificing ways.
Right.
So this is such an important theme for us to understand, even if we never go through abuse, even if we're surrounded by wonderful love and care. You know, so many parents are spending their entire lives consumed with showing their children God's love unconditionally. Right. But still, there are earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, fires, cancer. Terrible things happen. Trauma is going to happen to our children. And we have to safeguard them against buying into the lies of the devil that God is not going to use his power and his love in self-sacrificing ways. We all are going to struggle with this. Why does a God of love allow suffering? And that's why I wrote these books, to answer that question.
Wow, and I'm really excited about to go to each one of them, through each one of them. I know we're talking about these consequences, and relationship, it's, I'd say, like the main one, because people will really have a hard time with relationships, like trusting, and as a result, families will be like just falling apart more and more.
Yes, and society, social media, everything else systematically destroys the power of the family. We are in a culture where children are told, the truth is whatever you find on the social media influencer network of your choice. Wow. And nothing that your parents say is going to be as powerful as what your whole community of friends says. So in this environment, parents have less and less influence on their children's development of, you know, a picture of who God is and what are the rules for life.
And that's why I wanted the world to know this. And you told me that you wanted you had in mind to write one book.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you wrote one, which now it's not the first one of the series, of the set, but then you decided to write another one, a second one that eventually became 4, and then this 4 ended up becoming 7. Let's talk about this. Which was the one you started and why? Oh, why we already asked that. You had to answer why, but which one was it?
Well, you know, it's a crazy story of how it all happened.
Okay, tell us.
I wanted to be a writer ever since I was 5 years old. I can't remember ever not wanting to be a writer. Since I learned to read, I was consumed with reading.
Wow.
And yet I just had no confidence, you know. I thought no one would ever read something that I wrote. So I never tried to publish anything. And I never would have, honestly,
Wow.
but God got in the way. So,
I love what you're saying, just because recently I just met someone that thinks exactly like this. Someone who also had a rough life. She loves to write, and maybe you're not alone. So I'm hoping you're watching this, because this can give you a lot of hope for you to actually pursue your dreams and your talents. So thank you for sharing. Go on.
yeah, everyone who has had an experience with Jesus has a story in them, a book in them. Not all of us are writers,
Right.
but everyone has a story to tell of what God has done for us. And so for me, I've expressed how God walked me out of the darkness through these books. It's basically like I was once in a dark pit. God put a ladder down there, and I climbed those steps with really no professional help. I had a counselor once that met with me 3 times before he was killed in a car accident.
Oh my.
And his help got me started in that process of healing. But what I've done in these books is make that ladder for others to come up out of that pit by seeing God for who he really is. Not that I'm saying that people shouldn't have professional counseling.
Right,
Obviously, there are
absolutely,
so
yeah.
many important and valuable things
Absolutely.
there. But what I'm walking through here is who God is and how that gives meaning and richness to life. It shows us how much we are loved. And I did it through the story of the Exodus in the Bible because it just makes sense. The Exodus is the story of God delivering his people from severe trauma and walking them out of darkness into the light.
And we just came from the bookstore, and the manager was sharing some of his point of view, why he loves this book so much, because he mentioned that it wasn't just for kids. And this is part of the question I was going to ask you. I mean, we have so many kids' books out there, and why another kids' books? We've already covered a little bit, and I really want to go with each one of them. But I realized that this is not only for kids.
Right.
What's happening? He shared something that I was really amazed. He said when the mother or the father, when the family are reading the book together, what's happening to them, to the adults?
Yes, I get parents telling me all the time, or even people who aren't parents who are buying the books, reading them, and telling me how it's walking them through how to heal from their own trauma. There's even a review that somebody put up on Amazon. I didn't even know who it was, but she said, I started reading these books. I bought them just for my daughter, but along the way, they're healing me from my childhood abuse.
Isn't that amazing?
And this is what I realized as I was writing the books, actually. Because I realized, wow, I'm actually putting in here what has worked for me in finding the love of God and the character of God as the answer to every question.
Wow. So let's dive in each one of them, shall we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Sanctuary Light is book 7 in the series, but it was the first one that I wrote. And I wrote it because I was taking a class on the sanctuary at Andrews University. And when I went into it, I was like, I could teach this dumb class. I don't know why I have to take a class on the sanctuary. I know everything there is to know in the sanctuary. And I was so humbled.
Wow, that's cool.
I spent that intensive week, 8 hours a day, taking this class, and he didn't even touch on the stuff I knew.
Wow.
It was just incredible. And I drove home from taking this class, and I remember watching the cars, the lights on the freeway on the other side going, oh, I wish I could give this gospel to everybody out there.
Wow.
I wish they could understand the beauty of the message of the sanctuary of the Old Testament. It explains the love of Jesus in such powerful ways. It was an immersive experience of the gospel. And I'd never realized that before. So then at that time I was homeschooling 5 kids, my 3 plus somebody else's kids.
Wow.
And my assignment for the class was to write something for young people on the sanctuary. And I thought, well, that's a no-brainer. I'll write a story for my kids about children experiencing the sanctuary, because I had looked already at the resources for teaching my kids about the sanctuary, and they're always just lists of Bible verses, diagrams, dry stuff, you know? And the sanctuary was meant to be felt and experienced. You were supposed to touch the lamb, see the light, smell the incense, hear the ram's horn. It was immersive. So I wrote this story, and as I wrote, I started realizing these parents are explaining a lot to their kids. This had better be Joshua or Caleb. So it developed as I was writing. I realized I'm going to have to make this the children of Joshua and Caleb. And I honestly was only writing it for my children.
Wow.
But then some of my other friends who were homeschooling were teaching their kids about the sanctuary too. And I said, well, I wrote this story about the sanctuary for my kids. I'll send it to you if you want. So I just emailed it to my friends, and they're like, can we share this with our friends too? And they all started coming back to me saying, you've got to publish that.
Oh, wow.
So at that time I had 3 kids, but then we decided to adopt our 4th, our daughter from Ukraine. So she was 16 when we finally got her home.
Wow.
But during that process, we realized, we could publish this book and use it as a fundraiser for our adoption. And so around that time, I sprained my ankle very badly and had to lie down for 6 weeks with my ankle up. So
you had a lot of time.
During that time, I was like, let me take
What a
that
blessing,
story I wrote for my kids.
Wow.
Talk about God using bad things to accomplish
Absolutely.
good, right?
Yeah.
And I turned the story into something bigger and more meaningful.
Wow.
To make it a real book. Then I asked Pacific Press if they would publish it. I asked a couple of places, and they were like, no, we don't think there's a market for children's books on the sanctuary. And I was like, you're wrong. I know there is.
Oh, it was validated when your friends start asking for them.
Right.
Wow.
So
then we know something is good.
Right. So
Yeah.
I just self-published in the end. Somebody told me that through Amazon you can self-publish, and that's what I did. And the day after I had published the book, one of my friends sent me a screenshot and said, look, your book is #1 new release in children's Christian historical fiction.
Wow,
and I
that's
was
exciting.
like, what? In 24 hours? I can't believe it.
Wow.
And so that was where I first realized this actually could get out there. Like, people would actually buy something that I had written.
Exactly. Yes.
So it remained the #1 new release of the whole month that it was a new release.
Wow.
And people loved it. People started telling me everywhere I went how much it had impacted on them personally. Like, parents are telling me, breaking down in tears and telling me, this book was so life-transforming for me. Parents were telling me, my son came to me crying and said, this is a sin I've been hiding from you. I've got to confess it now so that my sins can be covered. Multiple parents were telling me
Wouldn't
these
you
stories.
parents would love your children to do that? Wouldn't you love to have such experience? I mean, I'm a parent also. I have
These
2
are
girls.
6, 8, 10-year-olds experiencing the gospel.
That's what we're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So then after this one, which one came out?
So then Dr. Moscala, my professor that had taught me sanctuary, he said, you ought to write one on every one of the feasts. And I said, I could never do that. But I started thinking, I thought, I could write one on Passover because it's the same kids. It's just like, a little while before that. So I started doing the research. And of course, the Exodus story is so rich.
Oh, yeah.
And as I started studying archaeology, history, I had taken an archaeology class before, so I knew some of what was going on during that time period. But I decided I had to keep these books as thoroughly researched and accurate as possible, like perfectionistic, like these are going to be accurate.
Awesome.
So I started writing, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. I decided to start when Moses came back, because that was when the faith journey really happened.
Tell us about it.
And that's where Faith Roots started out. I actually had written the first 3 books pretty much before it dawned on me this isn't going to be one book. This is going to be 4 books to get them all the way through Passover night.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well then revise. I guess I'm going to do more than 2 books. It was a very scary process for me to realize that I could actually be a published author. Like, every time I'm like, what if this is the one nobody likes? But it's never happened. So with Faith Roots, I realized I needed to write about faith, because all sin starts with a cycle of unbelief and pride from Lucifer onward. And all righteousness starts with a cycle of faith and humility. And so faith means coming to believe that God is who he says he is, no matter what I feel, no matter what my life circumstances say. God is who he says he is in his word, not who I feel he is or who my life circumstances seem to scream that he is. So that's what I made this first book about. And I used the allegory of roots of a plant going down into the ground, that the root never sees the flower, but it just has to do its job, which is to trust, sink its roots deep. And I used that as an illustration. So I started with when Moses came back to Egypt and said, God's going to set you free. And then everybody's like, God's going to set us free. Yay. And instead, the straw gets taken away. Their leaders get beaten. And these children, the children of Joshua and Caleb are going, where are you? Why? Why is this happening?
And in real world, we experience that all the time, don't we?
All the time. And so as I was writing this story, I realized, hey, this is the perfect place for Joshua and Caleb to start out as leaders and to meet Moses if they were beaten. So the story kept happening in my head as I was writing. I didn't realize that I was going to put that in there until I was writing. I was like, wait a minute. That would be a time they can meet Moses and Moses can explain to them, because it would be highly unlikely that parents who have been in Egypt for generations, before, all these generations have not passed down an accurate picture of the character of God.
Right.
But when Moses came back, he would have taught them, and it makes sense. So the story developed as, by the end of the first book, they realized that God is a God of love. We're going to trust him. At the end of each chapter, you can see I've put in questions to ask, because I wanted families to have family worship. And yet I know so many families don't know how to really have a meaningful
That's
family
right.
worship.
It becomes really practical.
Yes, so I thought this is a dead easy way for a family that doesn't know how to have family worships, or is having them inconsistently, or their kids are bored or whatever, to bring everybody together. I've had multiple parents tell me that they've had a wide range of ages of children, so their kids are 6 to 18 or whatever, but all of them come together and enjoy the story and get involved in discussing the questions after each chapter.
So cool.
And the chapters are short enough that you can just, have one every evening for worship. Or some parents say, well, you can't get our kids to stop. They want more and more.
Oh, I struggled with that when my kids were young. And we bought a really nice collection, a set. And then we went over this set like several times, because we will finish and then we'll start over again, and
Yes, we did the same with my kids. Before I had written these, we found a couple of sets of books that just really helped them, and the kids loved them. And some of my kids have ADD and just are so it was hard to get them to focus. But stories they would tune into, which of course is how Jesus taught.
That's right.
So a story is the perfect way to weave in lessons while a kid is just enjoying the story. So I have woven in things like complaining. Why do you not complain?
Because that happens a lot. Huh?
It's not even a hard thing to put into these stories. Exodus is full of this lesson.
Exactly.
But these are things our kids need.
Yes.
And I've tried to intentionally make sure that each story weaves in healthy family dynamics. So you see the parents touching their children in love, explaining things to them, working together with the children. We know that men and women in the families back then didn't have the same picture in some ways that we do of egalitarianism, and yet we do see consistently in Scripture that God teaches husbands to love their wives and wives to have unique relationships with their husbands where they love each other, they build a home that reflects to their children the character of God. So I painted that ideal in the families in this story.
Well, I love the cover. Yeah, it's really...
I was afraid that people wouldn't like it because they look so sad.
Well, in a sense.
But that's the story.
Yeah, exactly.
The story is about them going through the anguish. In that particular part of the story, their father had just been beaten by the cruel taskmaster. Right. I keep it kind of G-rated so they don't actually see their fathers getting whipped. I don't want it to be dramatic or graphic for children, but I wanted children to understand, our children have to be prepared for the trauma they're going to face.
And I hear there's
living in this world.
So many children at this generation cannot deal with frustrations.
Yes.
And many of them are killing themselves, taking their own lives because for small things.
We have such a culture of getting counseling, getting help, all of that, and yet we have a wave of depression and anxiety like we've never seen in recorded times. And we have to do something to equip our children, to make them resilient, to deal with some of these stresses by understanding who God is and how he will deal justly. So that's what Faith Roots is about. And in that story, they don't see God delivering. He's not stepping in yet with the plagues. That's book 2.
So, and yet you need to trust.
Yes. So the first book I knew had to be about faith, and the second book had to be about humility. Humility is the natural result of faith. When we see who God is, we cannot help but admire him and want to be like him. So Humble Stones is especially about how God uses power. Pharaoh uses his power to crush down. We see that throughout the Exodus story. But God is the opposite of the abuser. God always only ever uses his power in self-sacrificing ways, always to lift up, to heal, to build up, to destroy the enemy. God uses his power, but always for the purpose of healing and saving, even the Egyptians. So in each of these books, I show how God is working to save the Egyptians. You know, so many people, when they argue against the character of God, they say, look at the God of the Old Testament killing all those Egyptian babies. And so in these books, I show why that isn't true. How God was systematically, by every plague, undermining different Egyptian gods, strategically showing the Egyptians, you have nothing to trust except me.
Wow.
You know, all the way down to even the sun god. And when everything is blotted out, they've got 3 days to do nothing but think in the darkness. And then they have a final opportunity to say, hey, if you want to trust him, all you have to do is go hide at a Hebrew home and you will still have your son. And they've seen all these evidences of who God is, and everyone must make a choice. So God doesn't just abandon his people. He consistently shows them who he is and gives even the Egyptians this wonderful witness. So Humble Stones is about how God uses power and that why we can trust him with our lives. And it covers the first 3 plagues.
Wow. So you answer life's deep questions as why certain things happen.
Yeah, I've realized as I was writing the books what I was doing, that I was walking people out of where I had been as a child. And I realized it partly through some of my friends whose children were in the midst of traumatic situations. And they would tell me, wow, this is helping my daughter so much. She and I had this great conversation at worship tonight, and she cried and she prayed and she forgave. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what I wanted to have happen. And it's happening through the story of the Exodus.
Fascinating. Let's move to the third one.
Yes, so Wings of Love covers the next 4 plagues. So this one covers how God, starts allowing the plagues to only fall on the Egyptians. And in this story, I'm showing how the love of God is the perfect blend of justice and mercy. I use the chesed love. So I teach them chesed love in book 3. And I use the story of a little bird that bullies are throwing rocks at. They break the bird's wing. And so the children see how their father rises up to defend the little innocent bird. And yet they try to work to save the bullies as well from this wrong attitude. So throughout this book, I'm trying to teach children, you don't have to get vengeance. So throughout this book, I'm trying to teach kids, you don't have to get vengeance because God will give justice, and he'll do a far better job of getting justice than you ever could. When children can understand that, they start to see that they can forgive, which is the lesson of book 4.
Which can prevent a lot of diseases, because when people have resentment and when they hold some grudge or when they want revenge, they don't know the harm that they're doing to themselves.
Well, see, it is in our nature, because we are created in the image of God, it is in our very core to want to see justice, to want to see wrongs righted. We cannot erase that. It's who we are. And so, if we don't see that God will make it right, we're going to try to take the place of God and fix it ourselves.
Fascinating.
And that will be vengeance. But God says, vengeance is mine.
That's right.
God wants us to seek justice, but he doesn't want us to seek vengeance. We are not to try to cause harm to someone else because they caused harm to us or to someone we love. We can still act in love, trusting that God will give whatever this person deserves. So Wings of Love is where I continue building on the foundation of the first 2 books, showing God is who he says he is in his word. He's not who we sometimes feel he is, and he changes us into his image. Now, along the way, I'm trying to strategically give insights into every kind of Egyptian response. So there were Egyptians who gave their hearts to the Lord during this process. So I have some of them in the story, but then they stayed in Egypt. There are others who came to a form of faith in God and went along. And I have some of those in the story. Okay. And I have those who never come to faith, like Pharaoh, as well as one family that only comes to faith at the very end of the plagues. So I'm trying to show how God's Holy Spirit was working on every single person involved, both the Egyptians and the Hebrews, to bring everyone to salvation and repentance if possible.
Fascinating. Yes, and the story continues then with number 4.
Yes, so book 4 is the one on forgiveness and reconciliation. You have to have all of those previous things. You have to know that God is who he says he is, that you can have faith in him. You have to know how he uses power, that he will deliver at the best time, and it may not be the time that we want, in order to forgive. And when we have all of those in place, I walk children through 3 simple steps to forgiving in Joseph's Bones. So Joseph's Bones is especially focused on the story of the taskmaster's son and how Joshua and Caleb's sons have to forgive this bully who has systematically targeted them throughout all of these books. Now they have to forgive him because they realize, and I only thought of this as I was writing the story again. This is one more of those things that I was like, wait a minute, he's going to have to face that plague. Wow. And so I made him the taskmaster's firstborn son. Wow. And the 2 boys have to forgive him and actively work for his salvation if possible. Wow. And so that's a story that many people have told me is their favorite, and they cry and they experience the gospel through that. And honestly, that was a good book for me to read too, because I had to crystallize down in my mind, what steps did I follow in order to forgive? And putting those together for a 6-year-old to read was good for me as well as good for everybody who reads it. Oh
yeah, and forgiveness, it's such a big deal. And I'll tell you 2 things of my own experience about forgiveness. One is just recently, a few years ago, I was working for a funeral business where I was particularly started a new project with a psychologist to deal with grieving people. And one of the steps of getting out of the grief, of working out the grieving process, is forgiveness. Yes. Because people pass away, their loved ones, and they have unresolved issues or something, or they feel guilty is another thing, guiltness. They need to go through that. And amazing that when they do finally work out the forgiveness and be able to, they have some exercise. We do that at this process, at this course that we created. They feel much better. It's almost like they're free. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Forgiveness sets us free because we can say, I don't have to spend my life trying to make sure that you get what you deserve. Yeah. I can let go. It builds on understanding the character of God. If God is really who he says he is in his word, he has ways to get even. He has ways to make the wrong right. He will get the message across, whether it's through a donkey or the Red Sea or a wall falling down. God is not sitting there going, what in the world can I do to fix that? Yes. And so when I know that God will make it right in the end, I don't have to try to make it right in the middle. Right. So that's what I made the theme of Joseph's Bones, and it ends on Passover night with kind of a surprise ending for kids who were really caught up in the story. Okay, awesome. And it reminded me another story. Currently, I'm working with the doctor, a medical doctor, who is he's really fond of helping people with cancer, and forgiveness. He was shared a little bit about forgiveness also because that can really help people in their healing process. And some people might say, "Oh, it's easy for you to say. You're not in my shoes. You were not there. I can't do it." But let me tell you something. He shares a story, a quick story. He says this: there was this guy, a business partner. They had a partner, and this partner did him wrong, and then they broke the partnership, and then they split, and he was so mad at this guy because he felt like he was betrayed. So it was 10 years just eating himself up, and finally he got the decision, I'm going to kill this man. So he buys a gun, goes there, decides to kill this man, and when he goes to the house, he realizes he doesn't live there anymore, and then he goes to talk to the people there, say, hey, what's up? What about the person who lived here before? What's up? Oh, he died 10 years ago. Oh.
Wow.
So can you believe you're 10 years wasting your time, killing yourself, didn't do you any good?
Giving yourself ulcers for nothing.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, and the last thing I was going to say is my mom. My mom went through cancer and she eventually passed away, but just before she passed away, she really wanted to tell me something. And she said, Klinger, I forgave your dad. That was something that he did wrong about her business. She held on to that. So please don't hold on to those things. And I really hope that you'll be really blessed by this material, especially when you go through forgiveness, since we're talking about that. And I'm so glad we're covering this. So now you left that in the air.
So then, Joseph's bones ends Passover night. Desert glory starts the next morning as they are set free. They leave Egypt. They are headed for the Red Sea. Now, by the time I was getting up to these books, I had Dr. Richard Davidson up at Andrews University who helped me. He began sending me the International Bible Commentary that he's in the process of writing. So he was sending me the manuscripts for it ahead of time. So I could read the manuscript, write the book, and then send the book back to him. And he would go over my manuscript with a fine-tooth comb. Everything has to be perfect for Dr. Davidson. Awesome. So he would be like, no, they're getting water from the side. They have to be on the side of the mountain, not the top when he hits the stone. They have to be, it's at this time that they cross the Red Sea. It's between this mountain and this mountain. The area where they cross, there's a shallow place that's this wide. The water would have been this deep. It would take this long to get them across. And, little things. You can't have them drinking from streams in that area. There are no streams in that area. I'm like, okay. The soldiers can't be wearing armor because the Egyptian soldiers didn't have armor. They would have a leather strap across. Only Pharaoh has armor. Wow. So all these things that were just turning the lights on for me and realizing for the first time myself that the Red Sea crossing was so long that when it says that the Egyptian soldiers washed up on the shore on the other side, that means they were almost to the Israelites because they would never have been able to see them if they had washed up on the other shore. It was too far away. So the Egyptian army had gone almost through the whole Red Sea by the time God swallowed them. We'll never know how many people got to the edge and were like, whoa, wait. Or how many people just stayed back in Egypt and refused to go along altogether. Right. But what we do know is those that went all the way across the Red Sea, determined to kill the Israelites, finally got what they deserved. So forgiveness happens in book 4, but justice happens in book 5. And when I finished writing that chapter where the Red Sea finally covers Pharaoh, I cried myself. I was just like, yes, God, yes. You do it. You fix it. We can forgive knowing that you'll take care of it eventually. Yes. And you'll do far better than we ever could. So Desert Glory, especially... You used the
language of abuse. Yesterday the conversation says that the trauma has the abuser and the abused, and then you mentioned about justice that if people are saying, well, it's not fair, and now they can know, you tell them that it is, God will take care.
God will. Even if it's not until the judgment, even if we don't see anything in this lifetime. Right. We can forgive when we know who he is. Right. And so this book, I really sought to help children and adults to understand why we have peace in this world, even though we're still having tribulation. Wow. So of course, there's in the desert, they still have to deal with our food is dwindling. We don't know where we're going to get water, what's going to happen, all the complaining, because I know having 4 children, complaining is a thing. I really target that, especially in their time in the wilderness.
Awesome. Parents would love that.
How complaining is just so poisonous, and over it trips them up. So Desert Glory builds into Mountain Majesty, which is the book where I especially deal with how they come to Sinai, and in Mountain Majesty they're facing this beautiful mountain, the glory on the top of the mountain, and they're seeing what God is really like And then, of course, seeing the contrast with the golden calf. So again, Dr. Davidson helped me with this one to make sure everything was absolutely as accurate as possible. It helps so much to have somebody who's actually been there.
Yes,
who says,
yes.
the
What a
mountain is like
privilege.
this. There's this flat place up here where the elders would have gone to for that feast. And,
Especially it's for children. It's very descriptive. You know,
Yes.
you have to, and then, wow, that's bad. That's
and
really
yeah,
good.
I've tried, the Exodus story is so thrilling. And I've tried very hard not to put in anything that's, just extra sensational stuff, romance or whatever. Like, you don't need that.
Wow.
I want to make sure that fiction is as carefully done to focus on the story, just like Pilgrim's Progress,
Yes.
We want something that doesn't encourage hasty, superficial reading merely for the story. It doesn't destroy the power of connected, vigorous thought. Doesn't wean the mind from the love of Bible study and prayer. And so that's what I've designed these books around, and especially with questions at the end of each chapter. You're like, wow, that really is true. I hadn't thought about it that way. And all the way through here, but especially in Mountain Majesty, I deal with how God is also trying to reach the Canaanites, trying to reach the desert tribes. They meet up with Jethro in Mountain Majesty and realize Jethro is also one of the people of God. And that God doesn't just choose people based on their nationality. Many people are like, well, why would God pick these people and love them and hate everybody else and want them to wipe out the Amalekites and the Philistines and everywhere else in the Old Testament? But this book shows that God is trying to save every person, even the Amalekites and the Canaanites. So in this book, I talk about the racial issues going on. I bring out that Moses is married to a Midianite, and that Moses himself sees himself as an Egyptian, an Israelite, and a Midianite.
Wow.
So he has formed different cultural identities and identified with different people groups, and God puts him through that so that he sees the humanity of every person. He doesn't just see himself as one of the Hebrews.
And this idea is so current because we're living in an age with so much confusion and hate and division.
The polarizing in our country and all over the world is frightening.
Wow, it came in such a right time. Wow.
Yeah, so I really, my husband is African. He was born in Zimbabwe, and we lived in South Africa when we first got married. He did his doctorate on race relations.
Wow.
So this is something that was very important to me, that we would bring out how God's people are from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. It's not exclusivism. We're brought together as one people in Christ. And all the way through the books, I've tried to make sure that the illustrations are racially inclusive, that every plant and animal and bird and environment, everything is historically accurate. The trees are what was actually growing there, everything, because I want kids to experience the story of the Bible as accurately as humanly possible.
Oh, what a great job. And now you that are watching, you know why I wanted you to know this. Now you know. You've been through this. And not only you, the world needs to know this. The world is hurting.
Yes, I've written these books especially as an evangelistic tool for people who are wanting to understand Jesus. This is a perfect gift for a kid who's wanting to come to Christ, for a family that's going through trauma. So if your neighbor is going through a difficult time, this is the perfect gift to give them. Sanctuary Light, the final book in the series, is the gospel presentation. I felt it tied everything together with a bow. So even though I didn't plan to write it all that way, the Lord planned. Amazing. And I felt all 7 books together give a picture of how to walk out of darkness into light as we learn to see God for who he really is.
Yes, praise God for this. And I know if we finish this just as is, people will be mad at us because they'll say, "Hey, I want to connect. I want to know more. I want to get the books. How do I do?" If people want to connect with you, get a hold of you, is there like a particular email or I know you mentioned they can find them on Amazon. And other places too?
I have a website called NicoleParkerBooks.com.
Okay.
So that we've pulled that together. I just haven't done much marketing or anything. So maybe things will develop as we go farther. But I'm planning to keep that website so people can find them there. You click on it, it takes you to Amazon.
Okay.
So that's the easiest and fastest way to get them. Sometimes people buy them from me personally, and I send autographed sets. But I can only keep up with so much from home.
I know. I'm
still homeschooling 3 children at this point and teaching 3 classes at Southern right now. So it's busy.
I know. I can totally relate to that a few years ago. But now there's more that will be coming out. We'll just have to be a little bit patient. I know this video, hopefully we'll try to send across the internet everywhere. And I'm sure you can help us if you've been blessed, and if you know that this can bless some of your friends and your family members, you can share this video with other people so they can also be blessed as well, and find healing and find the true picture of God, which is missing nowadays.
Yeah, I have a friend who's just reading them right now as an adult, and she's telling me how she's just highlighting them all the way through and going back over these principles that are helping walk her out of darkness. And, a parent just wrote to me this morning who's in the middle of a church trauma situation and said, these books are blessing my kids and my husband and me so much as we're seeing that God is going to make this wrong right eventually. So, these books are, even if your child is not in the middle of trauma, even if you've never been through trauma yourself, this is a message that insulates our children against the lies of Satan that are going to hit them as they're bullied at school, or they face disappointment or tragedy, whatever is going to happen. We need to learn why God allows suffering and how he will resolve it in the end, because we are close to the end of this earth's history, I believe. And according to Revelation, it's just going to get worse and worse. We must prepare our children for the challenges they're going to face, even when we're not there to walk them through.
Yes, and there's two things I want to say before we end. One is that you can expect to know much more about this material, this whole project. Nicole Parker, I know you're busy right now, but eventually your kids will go to college, not to, you were telling me yesterday. And Hive are really committed to help you go to another level, to get these books translated to other languages. There's already a demand, but because of lack of fund and time, this is just having to wait. But I know the Lord will provide in the right time and the right help. You can count on us. We're going to do everything we can. And the second thing is, it's actually that Hive is here for this reason, is to help missional entrepreneurs to get their ideas, their projects to help and bless more people. Sometimes they have such a talent, a gift, and they might be stuck, somewhere. I've met a few. There's one lady in Guatemala. She has a great program for health, reversing chronic disease, and she reached out to us and said, I'm stuck. I don't know how to get past from this point. What do I do? And Hive is here to help more people like you. And so if you want to reach out to Hive International, and we'll put the link on the description as well. And I would really like to thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Nicole. And thank OCI. This is OCI Studio, especially Sebastian. Thank you so very much. And I hope you're blessed. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Klinger.
Yes, my privilege.